Coming up, could Joe Schoen be playing the free agent market perfectly? We answered that question, plus look at offensive line answers, not only on the market, but also in the draft, and whether or not Giants fans would be upset if Saquon lands in Philadelphia. We're diving coming up next. Yes, my friends. It's OGP, the One Giant Podcast, where you know that we are your host. Over here, Adam Armbrecht. Over there, Andrew Makowitz. We are healthy. We're wealthy. We're wise. I don't know if that's all true, but it doesn't matter. The point is, on a Friday, Andy, breaking down the state of the free agent market. We get some updates around the safety position over the last 24 to 36 hours that really changes and maybe informs the way the Giants approached Xavier and McKinney. A lot to get to here, including the offensive line. But I did want to kick things off with, how would you feel if Saquon Barkley was a Philadelphia Eagle this season?
You know, it's funny because if you asked me that during the season, I would be like, this is obscene. This is crazy. Like, he can't do that. That wouldn't be, yeah, that wouldn't be right. And now that I'm kind of in this like numb state of we have to fix this team a different way, I'm kind of like, second you decide to let him test the market, like you don't get to decide anymore. And if he decides that he wants to go play for the Eagles, then he goes and plays for the Eagles. Like you can't have your cake and eat it too. You can't say, well, I want him to make the money, but I don't want him to go to these three places. It's like either you want him here or you don't, and you have to let the rest of it happen. How do you like that for an opinion for me?
Thank goodness. Yeah. Thank goodness on a Friday, a level-headed Andrew Makowitz shows up. By the way, I poured my coffee too high in my cup, so I couldn't even raise it to sip it here. If you're watching over on YouTube, you got to watch that. I don't want to be scalding myself in the middle of an episode. Yeah, that's what I think is weird. Like, because my suspicion is the same segment of fans that talked about, hey, listen, you know, you don't want to sign the team-friendly deal. You don't want to think about your post-playing career legacy and all that stuff. Go ahead and walk. Is the same group of people that are like, whoa, you can't go to Dallas. Certainly can't go to Philly. Like it's you don't get to have it both ways. And if you're of the opinion, as we both are, Saquon Barkley, by all accounts, is a great off the field person. He's a great on the field person, great locker room guy. He's done everything the right way since he's been a New York Football Giant. Then what? Like why? Why all of a sudden skew so negative when he goes to the free agent market, wherever the biggest dollars are? If it ends up being Philly, of course it's going to stink. Like, of course we're going to have 2 episodes a season where we go, God, man, like it is brutal to watch him torch us, right? In week 7, week 8, whatever it is. But that's the nature of it. You let him go to free agency, and that means he gets to get paid wherever it is. And hopefully it isn't Philadelphia. Hopefully it isn't Dallas. But if it is, so be it. Like I I wish him nothing but the best. And I don't get crooked over it because he went to a division team.
Okay, so I was going to ask you one more question on this because they're talking about like Dallas having a spot for him right now. Like, what does it change at all if it's the Cowboys or the Eagles? Or are you like, hey, once he's out on the open market, it doesn't matter what team he goes to?
I think it changes if he goes to Dallas because you've also been hearing the reports that like Dallas is a total circus and that, you know, they're more concerned about taking tours through the weight room while guys are trying to like prep in the off season. And, you know, some former players that have been there have spoken out just about how it's a show and that's what it is. I think it would concern me less there because I don't know if Saquon, hate to say this, but it'd be like maybe Saquon like wouldn't quite, acclimate to that environment well. Although, if I'm thinking about overall product, I would say that going to Dallas would be more damaging to the in-division, rivalry in those games because as of right now, at least in the regular season, I would put my money on Dak probably before I would put it on Jalen Hurts. And that's, you give Dak Prescott, you give him Saquon Barkley, and you already have a top-notch CD Lamb on the outside. Like, that's a pretty dangerous combination for whatever they don't achieve in the playoffs.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, honestly, I don't think Saquon's vibe really matches the Cowboys. If he's going to Texas, I think we all think Houston makes the most sense. And I think everyone would understand with their cap space situation, they're on the upswing. And listen, Saquon Barkley is from Pennsylvania. All family and friends grew up Philadelphia Eagle fans. He went to school in Pennsylvania. Like, it's tough. You want him to be a Giant forever, then pay him the money to be a Giant forever. But you can't have it both ways where you don't want to pay him the money. You want him to take a hometown discount, and then you want to dictate where he goes in free agency.
Of course, he's a mess. So anyway, that's that. We'll continue to keep an eye on it. But again, he's a free agent, so we'll see how it plays out. He's just another man on the market as it currently stands. Now, let's get into, before we back it up and maybe start to give Joe Schoen some preemptive flowers here on free agency. Let's talk about the offensive line. We said we were going to get this on Wednesday, but everything kept unfolding around Xavier McKinney and really what's been already a wild offseason. Offensive line wise, we've now gotten Jordan Renan finally getting on board with us from over a month ago. And the top 50 free agent list came out. Andy said Robert Hunt is the guy that the Giants need to go get to add to this offensive line. I couldn't have agreed more. He is a free agent. Like, let's go get him. And he's now getting a lot of traction as the player, one of the top players, to watch for Big Blue.
Yeah, it feels like his name and Detroit Lions Jonah Jackson are the two that keep popping up in conversations, and it's a lot of people that are around the team constantly, so it feels like they are looking to bolster something at the guard position. Obviously, you can go on a lower cost with our old friend Kevin Zeitler or someone like that if you really want to kind of dip into the bargain basement. But you saw Kevin Dotson re-signed with the Los Angeles Rams, $16 million annually on a 3-year deal. I don't know if Robert Hunt or Jonah Jackson is going to make that much, but even if it's 13 or 14, people are squabbling over how many millions it's going to be. I think you and I both agree that no matter what, they have to fix the offensive line because it's been a problem for so long that because you've messed it up so many times, you have to pay the premium tax to be able to fix it, right? Like, that's the way it works. If you can't fix it through the draft, you have to pay premium in free agency to fix it. And I think you and I both agree that paying the premium on someone like Robert Hunt and solidifying one side of the interior offensive line is probably the way to do that.
Yeah, and I guess, it's funny too, because you can talk about, you want to think of the worst case scenarios for the New York Football Giants when it was Dave Gettleman and he said, go ahead, give me Nate Solder. I'm going to solve this problem. And son of a gun, we've made a massive mistake, right? Like, there's PTSD around the offensive line because it's not just that you haven't fixed it. It's that you've tried a lot of different ways to fix it and you haven't fixed it, right? Andrew Thomas is like the one bright spot here. We're waiting for, obviously, waiting for Schmitz in the center position to clean himself up, waiting to see if Evan Neal is going to be okay there at the right tackle, or just if organizationally they acknowledge that they cannot go into this season with him being the only viable option at that spot. So if any of these guys are considered to be, 95% set and forget, no real risk. That's what I think the Giants and Joe Schoen need to accomplish here. It cannot be, as you said, do you want to go bargain with a Kevin Zeitler? No, I don't want to go bargain with a Kevin Zeitler because I don't want an aging player that maybe drops off. Glowinski could actually fall a little bit into that category, even though he wasn't terribly old, or a player that you're just not sure can live up to the expectation. That's where I think there has to be a hard dividing line here for the Giants, and I'm not going to be satisfied in free agency if they do anything other than get what one of the considered top 2 players at any tackle guard position.
Yeah, well, I consider the guard position to be wide open. No one really asserted themselves. They obviously have spent a lot of time saying Evan Neal is still the guy. He's still going to have an opportunity to play right tackle. I prefer one of those swing tackles making $3, $4, $5 million backing up Evan Neal so that we have a contingency plan, one that we did not have this past year. I kind of think back to Cam Fleming being on the team, coming in for $3 or $4 million a few years ago. He kind of was supposed to be a swing tackle, coming in a pinch, he ended up playing more than he wanted to. But I feel like we need a contingency plan on the offensive tackle position behind Evan Neal. I think you sign a premium player like Robert Hunt, and then you go into the draft, Adam, and you address the other interior offensive line position with maybe your second, your third, or even your 4th round pick, and finally fix this thing once and for all.
And I want to talk draft here, but there's my last note too. Currently, it's like, this is my concern isn't the right word, but I am curious at a minimum. When you look inside the depth chart and, right now you say, well, Ezeudu still, you assume that they want to develop him. They believe in whatever his role can be. Markus MaKathen, right? There are players that they have drafted underneath Joe Schoen that I would hate for them to be. It's not a knock on them. It's just because they're unproven at this point for them to go into the season and say, well, one of them will be the alternate option if Evan Neal were to struggle, because we've seen Ezeudu played all over this offensive line, right? McKathen got shifted around a little bit through camp and then into the regular season. So if that's what they end up saying, hey, we're going to stand pat, boy, the history tells you that they have sometimes valued the guys that they currently had in their locker room, and that would be concerning. That being the case, let's turn our attention over to the draft, where we certainly think that there are a lot of options for the offensive line here. And we'll talk about the top end. And then also, though, moving back into it, Andy has some names outside of that first round, getting through maybe even the second round and still finding quality players. We will tell you all about that by telling you that this segment is going to be brought to you by Pietential, Pietential.com. That's Pietential. Why? Because it is an online assessment tool to make sure that your well-being is in the right place. It's basically a survey. It's going to go ahead and set baselines for where you are mentally, then allow you to have tools to go ahead and improve your well-being and track your progress over time. It's 100% free for individual users, and you can go over to Pietential.com today and get yourself checked out. Something that, by the way, I think every fan, coach, GM, player, anybody associated with sports should be doing to make sure that they're okay, especially as we head into this free agency period where it is effectively the Wild West. Draft time, Andy. Tell me about the guys that you like here. You want the Giants to shut everything down. No quarterbacks, no wide receivers. Joe Alt, 6 overall, book it.
I mean, listen, there are different ways that you could go about this. And like, while I would be very, very vexed if the Giants went and took Joe Alt,
we'll have definitions
I would understand that they're like, you want us to fix it. A generational type guy like this, who's supposed to be a can't miss prospect, might be one of those that could solve it. Now, as we mentioned on the show before, I'm not necessarily advocating for Joe Alt because he has played left tackle. He looks like a generational left tackle. We already have a left tackle. I don't know if moving Andrew Thomas or moving Joe Alt to the right side is the best thing to do with your first round pick. Usually I want them to play the position that they've played their entire life. That's kind of a philosophy that I've grown as a budding GM, is like, whatever they've been successful at, try to continue that.
Quick pause. If the Giants wanted to draft Joe Alt, which would you do? Would you say Joe Alt comes in and he moves to right tackle, or would you be kind of bullish on Andrew Thomas and his ability and say, you know what, Thomas, like, we're going to move you to right? And we talked about this over the years that, like, organizations, blindside matters obviously, but they don't really care as much about, left tackle, right tackle position. It's just, we want the best player we can put in there. Would you put Joe Alt plug and play at left tackle if that was the premier ready to play position for him, and move Thomas to the right?
Absolutely not. I mean, Andrew Thomas has proven that he is a top 5 left tackle in the league.
Right, okay, but they go to camp. They go to camp and Joe Alt shows that he can play it. But if they go to say they went to camp and Joe Alt's like, yeah, I'm good. He looks good either spot. Like, would you be willing to just be like, hey, okay, great, we have bookend tackles. Evan Neal, you're our backup, whatever you are.
Well, that's the philosophy that if the Giants were considering moving Evan Neal into the guard spot, it's a way that you could go about this. And then if you think about it and you go crazy with Adam, you move Evan Neal over to guard, you sign Robert Hunt as your one big free agent thing. And guess what? If the Giants do trade back in the first round and draft someone like Michael Penix, for all those people that want a quarterback, then you have Joe Alt on the right side,
right,
protecting Michael Penix's blind side. So it's a whole different piece of it that I could see that happening. That's how I'm thinking about, like, if the Giants draft Joe Alt, then I think Penix is in play.
And so just to go along with that, I know we're going a little sideways here, and we'll get back to all these prospects that Andy wants to talk about the draft. But just on that note, remember, like, what was one of the things? It's like Evan Neal. Is it that Glowinski's play was suffering, and Evan Neal, who has been bad but hasn't had any consistency alongside of him? If you think that Robert Hunt is a plug and play, solid to high end guard for you at a minimum, no matter what you do, if it's Joe Alt or not, right? You'd say, okay, like, it gives us our best chance to pair these two players together. Or if you're drafting Alt and moving to right tackle, we say, okay, but that's why we went and got the veteran, stable player to put alongside of him, right? Far too often, we've been able to look across this offensive line and go, well, wasn't a lot of consistency there at left guard, at center, at right guard, so you want to have some of these young players with veterans that you can rely on alongside of them. Okay. Sorry, everybody. Let's talk about other offensive line options in the draft, Andy.
Yeah. Obviously, there are offensive tackles like Olafashanu of Penn State. I kind of moving away from the offensive tackle position early. We have 2 first-round offensive tackles. Like, that's why I don't want Joe Alt. Like, try to figure this thing out. If not, go have a veteran backup at offensive tackle. I really do think that they need to figure out this guard position. And people say, well, it's easier to find a guard. Clearly, Kevin Dotson of the LA Rams getting $16 million a year. And we'll talk about the free agent market for safeties and other positions. They're starting to pivot. The NFL is starting to pivot and say, well, actually, those interior offensive line spots are no longer throwaways where we could just fill it with a 6th-round pick and hope that he's going to do well. So if the Giants are going to go try to fill both offensive line, interior offensive line, both guard spots, The guy that I'm looking at right now is Michigan's Zak Zinter. Adam, he's 6'6", 309. He's not as heavy as other guys, but he is a bruiser, a mauler. He's a guy that is really, really good in run blocking. He broke his tibia and fibula back in November against Ohio State. He was at the combine. He said, everything's looking good. I didn't hurt the ankle. There's no other issues. Like, I'll be good to go in a month's time. Adam, he's a 4-year player at the University of Michigan. He was a unanimous All-American this past year before injuring his leg. Because of this injury, before this injury, they were talking about him being maybe in the first round, early second round. The injuries kind of zapped some of all of that because guys like Cooper Beebe and others have shown up and shown out at the combine. If you're telling me the Giants could sit there and with, their third round at 70, be able to get a guy that you can kind of set and forget, to me, I feel like that's amazing value for the Giants, and it allows you to be able to do things with the other picks that you have in round 1 and round 2.
Yeah, dude, who doesn't listen? Not only is he old, but he's also injured. Like, Andy, I think this is a great prospect for the New York Football Giants. I don't knock it. Listen, pedigree matters. So, like, sometimes the timing of when a player gets injured, that throws off where the draft value is, right? My pushback on this would be, if you're taking him, like you say, 70, right? Now, the Giants don't have enough picks necessarily to do it this way, but it's like if you were taking someone at the top of the second round for the offensive line, and then you address another positional need there with your second pick in the second round, and then you come up at 70, you go, and hey, here's this player that, if not for the injury, we could have been talking about him being a first-round player, a real elite talent, and we want to go ahead and take a moderate risk on him, right? I would be on board with that. But I don't think that this could be your first offensive lineman that you take in the draft, because, and now it depends on what you do in free agency as well, obviously. But I would feel like you'd be saying, and now here's a question mark. Like, now here is, let's find out. We'll wait and see. And that seems a bit too much for me. Now, it doesn't mean that I don't like him as a player, but boy, double injuries and him saying the combine, don't worry, the ankle's fine. It's like, okay. When you walk into a room and someone says, like, does anything hurt? And you go, well, let me tell you what doesn't hurt. You're like, well, that's not great. Like, we'll go ahead and see what you've left off the list. I'll be curious to see if he has any type of, between now, because it's only the beginning of March, we're talking end of April for draft. A lot of things can change. And I'm sure a lot of teams, to Andy's point, are going to be monitoring what his medicals look like, how he looks physically, and saying, where do we mark this kid when it comes to the draft? You mentioned a name in there, though, and I'll get to another one from you because I think you have a couple here. You mentioned Cooper Beebe. That, to me, is a player that I circled and underlined here coming out of the combine and looking at where he's going to go in the draft and potentially having him be a target for the New York Football Giants. Now, listen, he was labeled as a third-round prospect, 73rd overall, positional ranked the 17th. I like his both and. He grades out incredibly well in pass and run block. And one thing that they do over on NFL Draft Buzz, they tell you, what is the defensive rating of teams that he played against? 78th percentile, which is pretty darn good. Like, anything over 75, 76% means you're playing against some of the better competition in the country consistently. I like him a lot. Now, whether or not he's actually a second-round pick when it comes to draft day, that's a different story. Do you look at this as, to go back to your point about maybe you get a little bit of injury value on some players? You're suggesting go get Hunt or go get one player in free agency, and then you can afford to wait until 70, wait until the third or fourth round pick there to add that extra piece. And by the way, do you have reliability on looking inside the Giants locker room and saying somebody, Ezeudu or McKathon, maybe it's more likely Ezeudu because he got a lot of reps last year, is going to be a part of this offensive line, the starting core on the left side of that guard position?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the way that I'm approaching it, is if you go and make the decision to splash and get one of the top 2 or 3 offensive guards in free agency, then I think that affords you the luxury to look and say, we can address other positions with our first round pick, our 2 second-round picks, and then as you get into the third, fourth, and fifth round, you start trying to find those players. Zak Zinter provides the value where I think a unanimous All-American was the anchor of an offensive line that was absolutely dominant and made look great. I mean, he's someone, to me, if you can get him in the third round, I don't know if the medical said that he could slip to the fourth round at this point, but also
Right.
with your fourth or fifth round pick, you could take one of his teammates in Trevor Keegan, another offensive lineman from the University of Michigan, 6'5", 310. He's going later on in drafts. He's not as highly touted as Zak Zinter, but again, his draft projection is the 5th round. Give me one of these guys from one of the dominant, almost all-time dominant offensive lines in college football, and let's solidify the line with veteran experience in free agency and one of these guys from the best line that we've seen in the past few years.
Yeah, I don't knock it, and you mentioned this here too, so I would feather in just to reiterate. I think where your perspective is, it's also and add a veteran, lower cost tackle to bring into this room here and say, hey, Evan Neal, like you don't make it out of camp looking like you've looked over the start of your career and still find yourself as being the starting right tackle. And again, maybe there's an in-house guy here that the Giants already like for that competition, but as long as you don't do that. You want to go sign Hunt, which we both love. We love doing that. You want to wait and take maybe a little bit of a risk player, but that has high pedigree in the draft in the middle rounds. Great, but you just have to have something there because I cannot walk into this season with Evan Neal as the starting right tackle unless you're going to tell me that he goes into camp and absolutely blows the doors off of it, and it's as if he had an amnesia since coming out of college and was like, oh, I'm a starting offensive tackle. I thought I was a can of pickles. Like it's insane. And it would give me real reservations about Joe Schoen, as we're going to talk about him in his offseason here. And the idea that like, hey, self-reflection, man, you have to be willing to do it, right? If you don't have the ability to look at your choices and say, okay, we missed on that. What was wrong in our evaluation process? What do we need to do better? Same thing with offensive line coach, obviously making that change, right? Like you have to have that self-awareness because I can't have you be beholden to your first round pick because you don't want to acknowledge that it may have been a mistake.
You don't want to hand the keys over to the kingdom of a guy that never has broken a Pro Football Focus 40 rating, has looked like a turnstile, has actually been injured a few times as well. You just don't want to hand the keys over with no competition.
And
that's interesting.
And oh, by the way, too, remember, like the Giants made out the quarterback here. So there's a world where midway through this season, whether it's Daniel Jones, whether it's a little bit of traction that's getting around this whole Russell Wilson thing, whatever it's going to be, if some other quarterback is there and then you have a rookie that's going to play games this year, what are we talking about, right? Like, how is rookie Bo Nix, how is rookie Michael Penix, rookie anybody going to walk in and go, now, just to clarify here, Joe, Evan Neal is the right tackle that's going to be guarding. You know, it's like you know that you do not want to have that level of risk in front of a rookie quarterback.
This is the last thing I'll say on it, and then we'll go into Joe Schoen on this. But Adam, this was the problem that we had last year. We did not have contingency plans, and look how it worked out. We know Andrew Thomas got hurt early. We know Evan Neal has had injuries on the right side. Well, who is the offensive tackle that could spell them for a little bit? We literally pulled Justin Pugh off the couch,
right
off the street to be able to play in primetime games with like 2 days of reps. We cannot have that happen again. You have to address it in free agency. You have to address it in the draft, and you have to have contingency plans because we know things will happen in this offensive line over the course of the year.
100%. Okay, so the other thing here, and by the way, 42.4 was the PFF grade for one Joshua Ezeudu. So something to think about when we know this is a player that was taken 67th overall by the New York Football Giants in the 2022 draft. Like, you can say whatever you want. They went to get this kid because they wanted him in their organization. And to this point, it has not paid off. So now... After kind of dragging Joe Schoen a little bit, we tip our cap to him by realizing that we knew the running back market was going to be pretty loaded up here, that there was going to be a lot of names swirling around. Even Josh Jacobs is being connected to New York Football Giants, which makes every fan's top absolutely explode thinking, what are we talking about? A discrepancy of $1 million, and you're going to go with Jacobs over Saquon Barkley. Nevertheless, the safety market, basically since the last episode that we did, talking about the decision to let him walk, saying, okay, he's going to go into free agency. Maybe there is this world where one or both of these players is going to come back because all of a sudden over the last 24, 36 hours, every team in the league is cutting ties with every veteran, high-paid safety, flooding the market and maybe changing the way that value is going to look here. And there is a laundry list of players beyond the safety position coming out of Buffalo that I know you and almost every Giants fan is like, come on down. Let's just make ourselves the Buffalo Bills of the NFC East.
I mean, listen, there's a ton of guys that obviously Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll have experience with. It would be crazy to not look at that and say, hey, maybe there's a couple of guys that can help this team. I mean, think about it. The Giants still need special teams play. They pulled Gunnar Olszewski off the street. He was serviceable for the Giants. But like Deontay Hardy just got released because they need cap space. Clearly, that's an area where the Giants need help. The Giants could move him down. If Joe Schoen was someone that brought him in to begin with, why not bring him to the Giants? There's other crazy things like Mitch Morse got released. The Giants had looked at him back in 2019. Obviously, he ended up going with Buffalo. If he'd be willing to move over to the guard spot, that could help the Giants out. There's
Just 4 years
Tre'Davious
later.
White,
No big deal.
the cornerback, who has played at a Pro Bowl level, but was obviously injured almost all of last season. The Giants are in the market for a cornerback. Would he take a little bit, of a thing to say, I'll come down to the Meadowlands and be able to reunite with Joe Schoen again? There's a whole host of guys that the New York Giants should be looking at. These aren't players that are way past their prime that Buffalo was like, they cannot help us contribute. Buffalo really desperately needed the salary cap space, and Jordan Poyer got released. Micah Hyde got released. These are all players that can still contribute to winning football, and the Giants would be remiss if they did not at least put in the phone call, say, hey, you remember me from my time in Buffalo. Will you come down here and play for the Giants again?
Of course. Listen, I'm all for it, man. But I just like you have the connection, so you know that it works. But again, it's like you're mentioning an offensive lineman. It was 4 years ago. Like now, if he's good, right? Or the safety Poyer, he's what, 32 years old? Like at some point, those connections matter for maybe getting some veteran experience at the right price point. But this idea of it's like, by the way, hey, here's one for you, Matt Breida. That worked out great. Connections with the regime. Great to bring in the guy. What was he? Nothing. He did absolutely nothing for this team. And sometimes what you end up doing is paying just a couple of $1 million here, couple of million there, and all of a sudden you turn around and you spent $10 million on a couple of players, whatever, and they really don't amount to anything. And by the way, you need backups, you need serviceable players, you need veteran experienced guys. So I'm not knocking this idea. There's quality players, bring them in. But just the reality check of like, it cannot be that just because you knew of them in Buffalo, that should put them at the top of your list. And at the safety spot specifically, let's say they were in the market for that. I can give you 4 or 5 other names that have also flooded this market that are 2 and 3 years younger and are probably going to come at the same or less price point that I would bring in if I was looking to, give a little bit of stability to that spot. And I'm not knocking their perspective. This is what GMs and coaches do. They look to bring players they're familiar with into their organization.
Regardless if you're looking at Jordan Poyer or Micah Hyde, we clearly have a spot at the safety position that is open right now. The Giants have said that they want to get something done with Xavier McKinney. He's the youngest with the most potential and upside almost on the entire free agent market. So it's understandable that they're saying, we still want you. The great news is that it looks like Joe Schoen read the room right here, because there are at least a dozen starting caliber safeties that have come onto the market. The market is flushed with guys. If you lose out on Xavier McKinney, being able to pay a fraction of what you were going to be able to pay Xavier and still have some, consistency, veteran leadership in that spot. We talked about Kevin Byard, links to Tennessee and our defensive coordinator. There's a whole host of safeties that you could go out there. I mean, Jamal Adams is still only 27, 28 years old, which is crazy to think about.
I saw that
there's
too,
like a ton of players that you could bring in on a $3 or $4 million contract that would give you at least some replacement level for losing Xavier McKinney.
And that is why at the moment it looks like Joe Schoen has played this market correct. And sometimes it's hard to understand it on minute 1, it looks different than it does on minute 30, right? So we're moving through the free agent period and seeing Joe Schoen at least allowing the market to dictate some of these terms. Now the question becomes, did he let them go because the market offers different or better value, or is it because this team maybe is in more of a rebuilding mode than we realize? We're going to come back in and highlight next week all of the players that are tied to Brian Daboll, to Joe Schoen, to Shane Bowen, to Mike Kafka. There's going to be certainly a mixing in here, and I wonder how much they'll extend it to coordinators as opposed to just looking solely to Buffalo or just allowing Brian Daboll to be the one that's the driving force there. A little more collaboration maybe this offseason. In order to be in tune with that, you're going to want to get over to YouTube, One Giant Podcast, subscribe, turn on the alerts, get us on the podcast feeds, over on Twitter at One Giant Podcast and at AndyMac214 at Adam Armbrecht. Join us on OneGiantPodcast.com for additional content as well. Until next time, as Andrew Makowitz would want, need, and nay, demand that people know.
As always, let's go Big Blue.